There's a great deal of storyteller in me. And so I'm going to tell you a story today. One of my folks in the nursing home greets me every Saturday with, "Have you got a story for us?" So my story is going to be about the prophet Jeremiah. We're going to take a real quick little stop in the psalm and then jump right over to the story of Bartimaeus. And I'm really going to go right through this, kind of literally. So if you want to follow along with your missiles, that would be fine. If you'd rather not, that's fine too. Jeremiah was, at best, a reluctant prophet. He was called by God, and he fulfilled his calling, but he was working in terrible times. The king of Israel, who worshipped God, had died, and the new king worshipped idols. The God of Israel was forgotten. And Jeremiah was constantly in his face saying, "God says, God says." And he was constantly saying, "Go away, shut up. I don't want to see your face anymore." Eventually, Jeremiah was imprisoned, and after the country was overrun by the Babylonians, Jeremiah was actually killed by his countrymen. I would say that the political climate was not kind. So we have to say a word about the Babylonians. The Babylonians discovered a new way to wage war. The Babylonians changed the face of history with how they waged war. Before, it was not pleasant, but a little bit more gentlemanly, that you attacked, you took over, you ran the country. The Babylonians said, "This is no way to do it because we want to rule the world. We want to take over everything." So they decided to wage what we would call now a war of terror. And they did that by saying, "Okay, Egypt, you're first." And they would just raze the country, burn it, kill everyone and everything in their path, and leave it in utter desolation. Well, he didn't have to do this very many times before kings started to say, "We'd like to be a vassal of you, Babylon, come on in, just don't do that here, please." But the Babylonians wouldn't stop there. They would take those captive people and they would move them around. You're going north, you're going south, you're coming to Babylon, you're going to Syria. And they would move the populations all around so there would be no unity. There would be no nationalism, no groups of people to begin anew. It would be all this mixture of people of different languages and cultures. So the people of Israel said, "Oh, but we can defeat these folks. We can do this. We'll make an alliance with Egypt and Syria, and we'll stand." Well, they didn't stand very long. And all this time, Jeremiah was going to the people and to the king saying, "The Lord God says to do it this way. Don't use your plans. Do something else." And they ignored him. The book of Jeremiah is 55 chapters long. And right in the middle, chapters 31 to 34, the whole tone of the book changes. It's almost like somebody inserted these chapters in there. And that's where we read from today. Don't read the rest of Jeremiah if you want for comfort, because it's war and it's bitterness and it's terrorism. But right here we have this little nugget of comfort and consolation. And all of this is written in the future tense. This is a prophecy. This is, you've really screwed up. You've done what you shouldn't have done. You've purposely gone against the directives of God, and he is going to come and save you. In fact, it's called the gospel before the gospel because it's so Jesus, it's so New Testament. It's so strikingly out of place, it would seem. So here's Jeremiah's prophecy for the future. I will bring them back from the lands of the north and the south and the east and the west. I will gather them from the ends of the world. And he labels 4 groups: the blind, the lame, the mothers, and those with child. 4 groups who could not possibly make the journey, who could not possibly walk back to where they'd been taken back to their homes. It's clear that God is going to do this out of God's strength, not ours. And God says, I will make the road level. I don't know if they'd ever heard of a level road in those days. This is before the Romans made the great Iter pathways. I will lead them to brooks of water, the essence of life. Those unable to save themselves will be saved by God. The message that is the message of the cross. This lavish love and mercy. And this is very much like the psalm. The psalm is this very much in poetry instead of prose, but the psalm is past tense. This is prophecy, this is future tense. So the psalm says, yep, guys, it really did happen, just like he said. When the Lord brought us back from captives, we were like, it was dreaming. Our mouths were filled with laughter. This is incredible. God is doing something we never could even have imagined. And in the end it says, those who sow in tears shall reap rejoicing. We do a lot of sowing, us Christians these days, in tears for our society, for our children, for our future. And we sow faith and love and hope and mercy and generosity and care. We may or may not ever see here on earth the results of that. But there shall be rejoicing, because the fruit of those seeds will flower. And the wheat shall ripen, and it shall be gathered and feed the nations. That's the image of these readings. Yes, there's tears now, there's terror now, there's hopelessness now. But wait, there will be joy. So when we look at Mark, Mark has taken this prophecy and brought it down to a specific person and a specific place and a specific time in this story that he gives us. This story actually begins in Mark 8. This is the culmination of the central part of the book of Mark. And the central part of Mark starts with a story of a blind man whose name we don't have. We don't know where it took place. In fact, when Jesus first laid hands on this blind man, he said, you might remember this incident, although we didn't read it, I don't believe this year. Well, yeah, I see, but I see it's like trees walking. And then Jesus lays his hands on him a second time, and things become clear to the blind man. That's where we start. And then you remember we went through the 3 prophecies of Jesus, of his crucifixion and resurrection. And we had Peter saying, oh yeah, you being Messiah, this is a good thing. But the suffering, no, you got that wrong. You got to forget the suffering part. And then last week we got James and John saying, we're not interested in the suffering either, but about the seats of power, we're interested in those. Could we pack our bags and move in now? So this is the culmination of this central part, which is entirely the story of Jesus and the disciples walking literally uphill to Jerusalem. And Jesus knows exactly where he's going and exactly what will happen there. So here we have specifics. Where are we? Jericho. The name of the blind man, Bartimaeus. We even know his father's name. I mean, this is well identified. This is no longer murky. This is clear. And he's sitting by the roadside. Now, this is a smart beggar. We're better to sit than on a very busy road. But today is unusual because there's all this excitement. There's something in the air. And finally he hears it. Jesus of Nazareth. They're talking about Jesus of Nazareth. Has he heard the name before? We don't know. But he says something extraordinary when he first opens his mouth. He cried out, Jesus, not Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me. Son of David, where did that come from? Well, David, of course, is King David, the historic king of Israel, the soldier, priest, king. And Son of David, do you remember the prophecy of God to David? The Messiah will be of your lineage, of the house of David. It's used just as we would use Messiah or the Anointed One or the one who was to come, they would call him. Why does he call him that? We don't know. I would guess the Holy Spirit had a hand in that because this blind man knows who Jesus is. He's never seen him before. He's never talked with him before. He's never, as far as we know, been in his presence before, but he knows who he is. And just like Jeremiah, he's rebuked. Be quiet. We don't want to hear it. And what does he do? He says it all the louder and all the more. Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me. And Jesus heard him and stopped. Come here. So these people who'd been telling him to shut up said, well, you know, he's calling you. Take courage. Like they knew what courage was. You don't think this man, this blind man calling out to Jesus didn't have courage? Jesus is calling you. He's not deaf. He's blind. And he springs up and he does something truly courageous. He throws aside his cloak. Well, what's a cloak? A cloak is a piece of warm fabric that you wrap around yourself. It works as a coat. For these people, it worked as their blanket at night. For this man, as a blind man begging by the road, it may have been the only thing between him and the elements. It probably kept him alive on the cold nights. And what does he do? He throws it aside. Probably, if not his only possession, certainly his most valuable possession. In this anxiety to see the Son of David and be with him, he throws it aside. And Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? The blind man replied to him, Master, I want to see. It strikes me, I said this to someone yesterday at a Bible study, and they said to me, you know, I sense the same thing. This seeing is not just, I want to see what color dress my wife just bought. Not that kind of seeing. It's seeing as an, oh, I see what you're getting at. That kind of seeing. Comprehension, understanding, wisdom. Which certainly fits the story because the birth son of King David, Solomon, what did he ask God for? The one gift? Wisdom. Okay. And Jesus told him, go your way, your faith has saved you. And immediately he received his sight. There's no trial period. There's no fitting of lenses. There's no eye drops. There's no spittle. There's no smearing of mud. Immediately. And then the zinger comes. And follow Jesus on the way. The way, curiously, can be construed in two different senses. One is down the road. He went away with him. He joined him. The other, and they're not contradictory at all, is to follow the way of Jesus, to follow what he taught, what he lived. And just when you think you're at the end of the story, you read the next sentence in Mark. And the next sentence is, as they neared the Mount of Olives, close to Jerusalem, Jesus sent off 2 of his disciples to find the colt that had never been ridden that he would ride on Palm Sunday. The trip to Jerusalem ends with this story of healing and goes to Palm Sunday. Because our seasons don't follow the text, we almost forget where Jesus is at what point in his life and his ministry. And I would like to think, it's silly perhaps, but Bartimaeus got to see there was more. And here we are, many years after. And we, first of all, have to decide what we want. Because one way or another, Jesus will ask us, what do you want me to do for you? Do you know what your answer would be? Would you be willing to throw your cloak, all your possessions, everything that protects you aside for that gift? And what would you do with it? Would you follow him? And that's what Mark is asking us. Amen.